The session we're going to have a conversation about today is when we were doing direct training, and I'll explain us in a moment, we always had the struggle of build projects or when to do build projects. And I say when is because when did we do enough skills exercise with students where we can observe their abilities and support them to then shift on to build projects. Sometimes we see programs, and we consult to a lot of schools across the country, we see schools that are jumping right into a build project, either because it's fun or administration wanted to have something that was showy, or you have a community partner and it on paper comes out with a great concept, but you run into challenges. And these challenges we'll talk about are not coming just from us saying, hey, here's an idea. They come from the fact that both Joe and I, and Joe is the gentleman below me on your screen right now, ran a construction training program for adults, for youth, for at-risk youth. We've run those that are coming out of the corrections facilities or correctional system, a number of different programs. And we have fallen into many of the traps we'll talk about and the allure to build projects many, many times. So we're coming from this conversation from a perspective of experience. We're not just those espousing something we read in a book. But when Joe and I were doing training programs, we started it back in 2010 with an organization called Colorado Construction Institute. We then merged that program several years later into the Colorado Home Building Academy, merged that with another foundation that was underneath Oakwood Homes. At the time, the merge made sense for a couple of reasons. One, they had money and no program, but a desire to have a program. We had a great program, but no money. So that marriage made a lot of sense. We stayed there for about 2 years after that. But what was really interesting is the program became a pretty looked at model from workforce development standpoint. Partners we supported within high schools, youth build program that we had run with a federally funded program for youth that had been disconnected from school. But often we would have people come over to our training program, see how we were doing things, and look at some of our training materials and say, where'd you get that? Or how'd you figure that out? And I think you all that are doing training would probably recognize that there's a lot of great content out there from a standpoint of a textbook, but seldom is there great content that you can acquire or purchase that are skills exercise, build projects, or sequenced training program, or even sometimes a good PowerPoint presentation to be able to teach from. So what happened is we ended up creating a company just to do that. So I left the nonprofit that I had started in 2010, and Joe and I partnered up and created Teach Construction. And Teach Construction is a social enterprise devoted to making instructional resources for teachers or instructors or trainers, whatever name you give yourself, to do your job well. So we often say we're creating the assets for people to teach construction, thus the name. So what we want to talk about is talking about skills exercises versus builds, but instead of just saying, hey, this is a good idea, we'll certainly have a conversation about that, but it's also about how can you do that, or provide a lot of different resources to be able to do some of those skills exercises. So I kind of teed up what we're talking about from a build project for skills exercises. So if you go to the next slide on there, Joe. Here's the reality. Skills exercises, we need to teach students how to do things. Ultimately, we want to teach them how to do things so they can build things. But ironically enough, those two elements, or those two things, kind of conflict with each other. And they conflict with each other from a number of cases. And we'll go through a few of them. On your screen, we've got what? Student learning. Oh, there's a perfect issue of student learning pace, not necessarily the same as the project. If you're doing a project for a community partner, or I don't care if you're building benches for the quad on campus, typically you have a schedule to meet. That can be a great thing to teach students time management and expectations of a client, whether that client be the school or that client be an outside community partner. But the problem is sometimes it conflicts with the pace that students need to learn. So we all know students need to learn an idea and then apply that idea through hands-on activities, right? That may be a challenge if your schedule is dictated by the project. So that's one element. when we'll go into that a little bit deeper, but curriculum demands and class schedule difficult to align with larger projects. Okay, so here's another one. I know Jen's been working a lot on course structure and competencies for courses that the state is asking you to do in your programs. Sometimes we end up in a build project that has a fair amount of elements of things we're not covering, which isn't bad, but it could be bad if you ran out of time to teach the things that you needed to teach. So that's one of the other challenges that we see. And the last element, as far as conflict, smaller, is time, really. We've got a bunch of different exercises we'll show you, and I'm sure you all in your classes do very, very similar things. We need to provide a space for students to learn, and students learn at different paces, right? We all know that. So if I'm student A and I got it and I'm ready to move on and we're doing a build project, I'll probably move on, and most often the teacher will embrace that, and off you go. But what if it's student B who learns a lot slower? That student B needs the opportunity to learn those skills as well. So when you're doing them in individual or maybe team skilled projects prior to a build project, you have an opportunity to really develop that student's skills. And a lot of this, I wish I could see everybody's face, but I'm sure you're rolling your eyes and some will say, yeah, no kidding. Of course we have to do that. We hear it all the time and we've done it ourselves. Of course we need to worry about skills, but when that project is there, when that tiny house or that bench or that community engagement project is there, it's so easy to focus on that schedule, back to what I was talking about first, then focusing on the pace of the student learning. Joe, to talk about these few things. Go right ahead.
Well, the whole design of the skills exercises for us has always been to really get down to details. And, you know, if it's nothing more than a cordless drill, it seems like if the students had one thing to do that day or that week, one task, to really minimize or focus those tasks on that skills exercise, their success would be a lot more, it would be better and more frequent for more students. So if you can just, you know, build projects tend to be really broad in all of the things that need to happen. A lot of problem solving, and skills exercises get down to the nitty gritty. It might just be how to use a hammer, right? And I'm sure you guys as trainers have had the experience that students at the very beginning love to do the simple things. Entertain students, it keeps them engaged. As they learn these skills, they put that in their quiver, then they want something more, I guess, more challenging to do. But these skills exercises at that moment are really exciting to those students. It could be just driving, maybe simple assembly of a few parts of lumber with, say, screws or nails, right? So you're using, it's a controlled environment for that student to learn a skill that you know they'll need either on the job or on that build project.
I want to add to that. I mean, one of the things when we were doing some of the rudimentary skills projects, and Joe was referring to a fastening block, and we could even show it to you in a little bit, but it's so easy, especially when we ran through several cohorts of students, to just think, oh, it's just a fastener block. Don't they want to do something more? And we forget they haven't done any of that. And when Joe was a big supporter of this when we were doing it, where every day it would be a different type of fastener, and here's a bucket, go grab 5 of these types of nail, anything from a sinker to a ring shank or so, and go fasten them into our nailing tower. It seems so simple, but every time they did it, they had an opportunity to learn more skills. So I think it really worked out well.
Right.
From that type of activity. And I think you're saying the same thing with like the cordless drill exercise.
Sure.
You know, that we're then taking that cordless drill exercise and running drywall screws from coarse thread to fine thread to a Torx head to a Phillips. You know, and, well, heck, we did not use impact guns. We used regular cordless drill. And the reason being is, you ever hear 20, I'm sure you have, 20 impact drills in your shop. It is really annoying. So we use standard cordless drills. For a while, we were using the old 18 volts because they were just beefier.
Right.
But it took a student a long time to figure out the axis of the drill to the tip, to the fastener, to not strip those heads out.
Right.
If we were doing that on a build project, we would have gotten nowhere at first.
Right.
Because they had a huge amount of time to practice it.
Right. And there's where that opportunity to learn and make mistakes happens. The students do it on a board, say 4 feet long, and that's their space to practice, which then leads to your confidence and their confidence on that build project later. So if they don't have that small space to kind of work through all those problems, they don't necessarily they may never have that chance on a tiny house, or they might have that chance and fail at it. And I've seen a lot of tiny houses that should never be moved that were built in a high school parking lot. Right.
And I don't want anybody to think we don't think build projects are great. I love them, and I love the build with a purpose, and we'll talk about that. But we love them when the students are ready for it. And a lot of these points we're coming up with came from challenges other teachers that we worked with had. I mean, there was a teacher we worked with that was building a tiny house that was really cool. Semester ended, the house wasn't done, and the customer, their community partner, wanted the asset. So the teacher was out there finishing it off with absolutely no student engagement, and obviously that's not ideal. Right. But you may have mentioned it, and I was writing a text.
I did not get into it.
But equitable is one that we should talk about. Go ahead.
Right.
When we talk about equitable, we talk about it a little bit differently.
So equitable is a fancy word for every student really gets a chance to do whatever that is. And Mike always uses the example of a tiny house. How many windows do you have on a tiny house? And usually the answer is at the most 3, right? Well, how many students do you have? So how does every student learn and hands-on go through the specific process of setting a window if there's only 3 windows? Do you take them out and put them in multiple times? That can be a disaster for the final product. So
that flange on the window is going to be pretty whooped.
Right.
That there we used in a training session 3-4 times, and I wouldn't put that one in my house anymore.
Exactly. So the skills exercises sort of work towards every student having an equal experience on whatever that skill or task is that you're trying to convey. And that could, like I said, that could run the gamut between hand tools to power tools to even framing exercises, right? Or windows, for that example, too.
The other thing on equitable, and it happens in every class, you've got your rock stars, and you've got some of the students that they're not rock stars. Maybe their dexterity isn't the same as everybody. Well, what happens, whether we try to avoid it or not, they almost get marginalized, or they marginalize themselves. So you've got those who get it and can pop that window in with ease, and the people who aren't real comfortable drift to the back, right? And they're watching, and the teacher comes by and says, "Hey, you got everybody getting it?" "Oh yeah, it was great." But one, you didn't have the teacher see it to know if the student did it well. But 2, that student didn't get the experience.
Right.
So when we say equitable, we mean everybody can do it.
Right.
Affordable, though, too, skills exercises can be set up with common material. It can be set up with scrap material or material that you're using over and over again. Obviously, you're not doing that on a build project that has a certain expectation for finished quality. So,
and finish work is always, in the scope of when we were teaching, was always pushed to very last, because to me it was always about, if you can make 2x4s fit together, then that translates to finish boards later, and it's almost a building of confidence for the students. If a student can put 2x4s together, they can hopefully evolve into more of that finish material.
Yeah.
I mean, that was always the hope. The other thing is, you want to create a place where it's not perfect. What they're producing is that solving a problem, learning the tool. And so, on a finished project, the pressure is too high, and the product dictates the expectation. So for a student on a skills exercise, you hope to see some progress, but mistakes are okay there. And that brings up the last point, which is that a trainer has an ability in a skills exercise to evaluate each student, which is really difficult on a large project. Students either hide, or the trainer's just too occupied with trying to solve whatever job site issue they have that day, materials showing up at a weird time, or students, changing blocks or whatever. So
Attendance. Well, I mean, heck, we look at a COVID issue now. We've got attendance challenges, and I don't think that's going away come this coming school year. We're going to have times where we have full occupancy with students. We'll have times where we don't.
right, yep. And the plumbing day was Monday,
Right.
and John was sick on Monday. So the question now is, how does he get
Right.
caught up on his? How does he get caught up with all the other students? And a skills exercise is per student, maybe sometimes in pairs.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
rare, sometimes in teams, but mostly repeatable, scalable, and personal for the
Right.
students.
All right, what do we have next? And as we go through these, again, like I said, a lot of this for most of you is probably, well, of course, but again, it is so easy for us all to, I don't want to say forget, but to jump into the builds because they're fun.
Right. And we've kind of covered this.
Yeah, 100% participation.
Yeah.
I mean, here's the reality. We as teachers, trainers, instructors, it's our responsibility to ensure all students in our classes are being taught the competencies that are outlined in the class or in the structure. And then as we're grading them, it's our ethical responsibility to grade that correctly. So you may know how to put a window, understand the concept of a window in the sequence, but maybe you couldn't put it in yet because you weren't there. Or you tried it and you just didn't do it well. It's our responsibility to be able to have every student hit every competency that you're expected to be teaching. That is just very, very hard if you're going from theory to a build project.
Yeah. But for a teacher, that's the goal, right?
Right.
You're striving for that every moment.
Right.
Is that every student, completes, succeeds,
Sure.
learns.
The item of the last one on there, though, is confidence building with no penalty. So here's what we saw a lot of. When we're doing a build project, the expectation of the finished product is set, right? And you're setting your students up with, look, you got to do this great, do this well, or make a good product because it's going to the quad or the high school, or it's going to another community partner. That can be a fantastic environment because it's now up in the game for student performance. But it can also be an environment that hinders students to where I don't even want to try if I think I might fail because the teacher told me how important this is. We have to set up environments for students to fail because, I guess I shouldn't say fail, to make mistakes.
Make mistakes.
Or make mistakes in an environment that aren't too costly, or make mistakes in an environment that are easy for you as a teacher to observe, help the student correct it, and then they have a chance to do it again and do it successfully and be proud of it. So when the capstone project comes, or the build project comes, then it's something where they're being set up for success and not really setting them up for a challenging, I don't know, I'm not a kid anymore, but emotional environment. I mean, maybe it's, hey, that could get a lot of young people nervous.
Yeah.
So
I remember we were doing a tile exercise with some students, and I guess I'd turned my back for 1 second too long, and if it had been the actual project or the build project, I'd been in trouble. But they were pouring the grout into the bucket of water, so that never works, right? Then you end up with a soup. So basically, we ruined one bag of grout instead of like a whole project. Luckily, I had 2 bags, but anyway, that was on me, right? That was not enough instruction at that moment. But.
All right, what do we have next? And we're going to get to a few examples, everybody. We're not going to just sit here and just bore you to death by talking, and I hope we're not just boring you, but we've got some examples of skills exercises that we use a lot too.
Right. Observe, evaluate, and assess. We've kind of
We talked about this one a lot,
Yeah.
but we put it in here and can never stress it enough. Joe mentioned my soapbox statement of, oh, we'll see a teacher say, yeah, my students learned how to put windows in, and they did it on a tiny home and there's 3 windows and they had 30 students. And I roll my eyes every time, and I'm sorry if one of you participants or the audience have run into the situation, but I'd say it to you as well. You had 3 windows, you had 30 students, they didn't all learn how to put them in. They may have seen it happen, but when we're talking to and we're preparing a young person, ideally for a career, And we do a lot of support for the construction industry of helping develop the next generation of field workers. So I always look at things of a lens of, is someone ready to do this as a job? You had 3 students, I'm sorry, you had 3 windows, you had 30 students. They all did not learn how to put a window in. You can say they watched a video, they watched other people do it, but don't tell that potential employer that they've done it, because they didn't. So that's the pet peeve. The other is, you have a responsibility to observe, evaluate, and assess. Observe, evaluate, support, and assess, we should say.
Sure.
Every student learning these functions. I don't care if it's grabbing a hammer, we used to call it like a cobbler, because your first time, most of your students probably grab a hammer, whether it be a finish hammer or a framing hammer, they choke way up on it, right? And they're tapping like this instead of allowing the hammer to do the work. They got to learn that. You need an opportunity to support them, and you're not taking that waffle face of a framing hammer and they're smashing up the $20 in trim you just paid. Well, $20 in trim is now what, this much,
Right.
you know. But you get my point. Is you need to be able to allow them to make those mistakes. The best way for someone to ruin a piece of trim is on a trim training box where it was crappy trim anyway. So.
And when I was teaching directly with students, I always felt, and I don't want to sound lazy about this, but I would always give them a specific set of instructions that looked as much like plans as I could generate for them, so that they would have something to carry that skills exercise forward. I was one of those people that spent way too much time with each student. And if you're doing that, a lot of times everyone else is waiting for instructions unless they have them. So now you're encouraging them to learn the skill of plan reading while they're doing the tool skill building, the material knowledge, all of that stuff. And it's something to drive them. And they're not relying on you to be there with them every moment, which I felt like was good job training, because a lot of construction has to do with that problem solving in the field. So if they have to spend some time on their own trying to figure it out, I always felt like that was a good thing.
Yeah. You did mention one, and I want to bring it up because we didn't put it in this presentation, is the plan reading or reinforcement of plan reading.
Right.
So a skills exercise done well can be done 2 ways. One, it could be oral from you. And actually one of the skills exercises we have is for panel cuts, and we set it up that the instructor is actually saying, here's what I want you to do, and you get your instructions that way, because that's what's going to happen at work, right? Hey, somebody's on a roof and they're going to call down what they need. Cut person's going to cut it and pass it up.
Right.
So that's a common instance. But the other thing is all of our skills exercise are really defined to where you're reinforcing plan reading. Right. It could be a set of shop drawings, but they've got dimension lines on them. They've got a sequence. They've got an assembly, a sequence. You're following instructions. And really that's what a set of plans are.
But actually, I'll add to that. You're not only, it's not only about reinforcing plan reading, you're reinforcing every other skill that they've had previous, whether that's measuring and marking, it could be speed square use, but you're building this sort of repertoire. Their quiver gets, all of these skills are building and adding. And we try to sort of design our skills exercises to be cumulative like that.
I think we do, and Jen made a comment here, if you will bring up any one of the basic skills exercise, cut practice, let's just say. So Jen made a comment that some of you may have seen, is sometimes skills exercises, and I'm paraphrasing Jen, can be trivialized. And really what happens is if let's just take cut practice, and Joe's going to bring up a copy of it in a second. If you just say, go and cut 10 blocks and give me these sizes, let's just say, it could, and it just seems like something you've got to get through. The student hears that, and let me just get through this before, so we can get to our fun stuff. If you really define that skills exercise as a way, let me bring it up here, where this is a plan reading type of thing for cut practice. So we have a basic set and we have an advanced set of skill practices, and this is cutting blocks. But in this, they're cutting blocks to a specific dimension. In fact, the first page, I think, Joe, is our standard one where they're cutting a set of blocks and pulling off of one side. The advanced side, they're pulling off of it, and their scrap is actually their keeper piece. And because you're teaching kerf. So it's easy to just say if you're always cutting this side and you get comfortable putting your blade on a certain side of the line, but now you have to switch that when we get to this stage to it. But it's problem solving, it's plan reading. Granted, you're not going to see a set of plans exactly like this, but it's calling out dimensions. It's often, you would have one person almost every time that would look at the set of plans, do all their measurements at the same time, mark them, go to the saw and just say, I'm going to cut all mine. You all know that doesn't work. You're going to lose a certain amount of material you're sweeping up later. So that student, we would allow them to make that mistake. They're thinking oh, I'm going to save time. This is easy. And their first block is right. And their second block would be almost right. And then everything else would be far enough off, because we used to say you had to be within a 16th every time. So it became a lesson. And I used to love seeing that person do it all the
There's
time.
always one in every crowd.
In fact, I see you showing a picture of a sawhorse. I don't think you have it queued up and you don't need it, but we have a set of plans for the sawhorse. I remember doing one of our adult programs, and this is kind of an aside, but it's about allowing people to make a mistake. The student cut the first leg about 2 inches too short and said, I got it, I'm gonna solve this. He cut all the legs to match the first leg. And we noticed it, and we just let him go through the whole project. And then at the end, we evaluated everybody's build. Well, he had a pair. One was proper height. The other one was 2 inches too short. And he was really proud that he solved the problem.
And he actually, the second one was, there is success there.
There's
Number
some
2,
success.
right?
So we had to try to make sure, look, okay, you did solve a problem, but the plans didn't ask you to make a sawhorse. They asked you to make a sawhorse at 24 inches high at the top of surface, or whatever the measurement was. So we're able to really turn that into a learning environment, knowing that he could take it apart, just fix the 4 legs and reassemble it. But so he did build something, but he didn't build what he was asked to build. And we were able to bring it back to a teaching environment to say, because he argued, I remember saying, yeah, but it's flat, it's square, look, it's flat, everything's great. And we showed the plans and said, what's this dimension? You didn't pass, do it again. And he did, humbly. It was really kind of good.
And the interesting thing was, what I learned from that is we had another student who was always, and there's these students as well, that was way far ahead from all the other ones, made a matching one, and now we have a set of sawhorses we used for a long time because we had some shorter students, right? So now you're asking for a custom problem to be solved by another student who's always standing around, because they get done way before everybody else does.
That's true.
So a trainer on their best days can read the students, task them, and given all these different skills exercises, skill levels can make it work, which is hats off to you.
Yeah, go ahead and bring the presentation up. The one thing I kind of tying on to what you were saying, Joe, we do now it's monthly, but we do a monthly teach talks, and we have very similar to this, but we have teachers that we work with from all across the country, and we get together once a week, or once a month rather, and have conversations about what's worked, what hasn't worked. Anyway, in our last session, and I can't remember, Jim is his name, he's running a program out of Pennsylvania, and he uses some of our skills exercises for electrical. What he really liked, and we could show them to you later, but they're basically a set of plans to do. One could be a basic circuit, one was a 3-way circuit, one was a switch, a light, or a load, and an outlet. It was about 4 or 5 different ones. But it's because they were set up as skills exercises and with documentation, he was able to work with students, and this was because of COVID. He had people all over the spectrum. He had the smaller groups. We had first years and third years in the same class. I'm sure you guys ran into some of these issues of just trying to get through. But anyway, he was able to hand out those skills exercises and have students work at different paces. So he had some of his students working on the more advanced circuits and some working on a very basic circuit. The point being, by having them as defined skills exercises in your program first, it allowed that to happen. If it was only a build project and you're going to wire one big thing, that wouldn't have happened, and it couldn't have worked for them. So there's other values too from defined skills exercises. So, okay, what do we have left?
Well, I think a big one, and we always struggled with this, I think it's even more of an issue now, is the cost of materials. So skills exercises, as we have designed them, have been always very general construction materials, nothing too exotic or fancy, something they would definitely need to know a lot about, and they'd see it on the job site when they went to actually go to work. Common materials, generally inexpensive materials, things we could stock.
I chuckle because things we used to say were inexpensive of 2x4s.
Well, I know.
or
I
something.
mean, it's just, I can't even comment on the cost of
They are coming down.
materials now.
We just went and bought 15 of them this morning for another filming of a lesson we're doing, and $525, $550.
For a 2x4.
Right.
Yeah,
So-
92 and 5/8.
Better than they were. But
Right. So, but budgets are always constrained,
Yep.
period. And even when materials were cheap,
Yep.
and we could buy a 2x4 for what, $3,
Mm-hmm.
we were still using every bit of it. Kind of like,
Well-
the Native Americans, the buffalo, every part gets used, right? And we developed an exercise to use scraps, the cutoffs from our cut practice.
a shameless plug, 'cause I don't think we have it, but on our Teach Construction YouTube channel, also on our Facebook page, we just posted a little video we have about what we call the nailing tower. It's a 2-minute video talking about what we did, and that's what Joe was referring to.
Yeah.
We ended up with scraps because our rule in the shop was a student was not allowed to cut anything that was less than 12 inches. So for a cut practice type exercise, if it was 12 inches, it went into, or less, it went into scrap pile. But we had this pile of scrap. What do we do with it? We made a skills exercise out of it. It's actually this particular exercise where you could see that picture on the right-hand side was just a bucket of scraps. But we built this nailing tower with a set of plans and had students take a piece of wood out of the center, put it down on it. We'd go 2 courses flush, and then the 3rd course you offset by a 1/2 inch. So they had to measure in 1/2 inch, use a chalk line, snap a line, and keep fastening more boards. And every 3rd course, you had to re-square it. So you're using 3, 4, 5, or equal diagonals, and they had to show that they actually went through and re-squared that particular exercise.
Yeah.
Point being is cost. That was garbage material that we were able to turn into a reasonable skills exercise. I really like that.
Well, and I like to test these out by doing them. And I had after about 3 courses of this nailing tower, I'd broken a sweat myself with a framing hammer and just a handful of nails. It was not as easy as you might think it was to take these small parts and put them together.
Mm-hmm.
And the question then becomes what's real world and what's not. To me, it's the students struggled with short pieces of wood a lot more than they did with long parts, generally wall framing. So, blocking was a nightmare with my students, always. And so this was sort of blocking exercise, having to deal with small pieces of wood. Where do you put your fasteners? Oh, you split that piece.
Mm-hmm.
Now you got to pull out a pry bar and do some demo, which I love demo with my students too. So anyway, not an easy thing to do, but very effective.
It was, but what we were able to do with that exercise too, by getting creative, is then using it for we used to use it not only for fastening practice, but for sawzall, reciprocating saw.
Yes.
So, sorry, I hesitated because I try to use the proper term, not the brand name. But you would send a student over to it and say, cut this section out down 2 or 3 layers.
Right.
So you're using a bimaterial blade, you're doing precision, you're following instructions.
Right.
It turned out to be something, that thing would look haggard by the end of a program. But
Yeah, it would, but you could always, people would come pick them up for planters, or even, crazy enough, we had people that wanted them for bonfires at the very end. A lot of wood in there, real heavy. And that was the thing, is something solid to nail to is a great thing to have, especially when you're doing reciprocating saw training, because most things you're cutting out with a sawzall are fastened in place, and
Right.
in a workshop it's really hard to do the setup for that.
so that
This
tool
was
becomes incredibly dangerous.
Right, so this was solid as a rock, setups there, especially for nailing too.
Right.
So just a solid base to work off of, and made of 100% trash, basically.
Yep.
So,
So let's see what else we had to chat about. Then I want to show some examples of some of our
Well,
other
you want
activities.
the-
We're trying to, the presentation, yeah. We're trying to throw some of this back and forth of examples of how we use skills exercises. So if we're going too quick or jumping back and forth,
yeah.
please
I
let me
feel
know,
like
or
this has
Jennifer
been
do.
covered.
Support students. Yeah,
Yeah.
the different levels I think is the key. That is one of the hardest things to do, to slow this down for a moment, is to teach to 20 students with vastly different either competencies, maybe
Right.
maybe some of our participants here today I saw were from Department of Corrections. So you're going to have people that could have had, maybe they worked in the trade before, and people that have never worked in the trade before. You know, the value though of having an activity that can be, hey, you're going to do this portion, but we have another version for somebody else if it's more experienced, as we were talking about.
But also, a lot of this stuff, one time through is never enough.
Right.
So a skills exercise is a really easy setup to do it more than one time. And you as the trainer can modify it. It might be the nailing tower starts with hammers and they revisit that multiple times. It might be they have to do some demo on it. It might be that they move to cordless drills, same nailing tower, different
Right.
fasteners, different tools. And ultimately we would do our pneumatic or our air tool training on that same same build.
If we had one, because we also use a nailing tower, or I'm sorry, the header
Right.
project we'll show you
Right.
here in a second. The other item on there though, and this one we'll end with and show you some examples, is it frees up the trainer, right? So here's the thing that is a challenge when you're doing a build project. If you're the only skilled instructor, trainer, teacher, whatever you want to call it, in the room, and you're working on a build project, your eyes are on the build project. Because as Roger put a text in here just a little bit ago, the skills exercises with minimal cost, everything they build has to be sellable. If it doesn't match the print, the client won't pay for it, right? I mean, we all know this, and it's great to teach students that, but that's where you as a teacher, your eyes are on the product. If you have 20 students, how are you helping 19 of them or 18 of them?
Yeah.
The value of some of these skills exercises is, and I used to do this when Joe first started working with us, I said, you should have a can of coffee or something in your
Yeah.
hand walking around the shop. Because if you don't, you're probably picking up a tool and helping the student do the project. Not that students don't need help, but the project doesn't need to be built by an instructor or a teacher. It needs to be built by a student. So on a build project, I see teachers all the time with their bags on, jumping in. I get it. I get the pull. My biggest request to every teacher is stop it. Put your hands in your pocket and get the student to do it. And if they're not there to do it yet, you didn't do your job yet. You've got skills exercises to do before that. If you have to do it, go back to the skills exercise.
Right.
These allow you to, or any skills, we're not just saying the stuff we've made, work the room, support the student, walk around, give the words of wisdom, the tips of the trade, the experience that you have. That's what the students need. They don't need you to do it for them.
And Mike broke me of that habit. I thought having my tools available at all times was a good thing for the students, but I realized later I could borrow that student's tool for a second, give it back to them. If I couldn't get that student to do it, I wasn't really doing my job. And eventually it turned into the whole circle the herd. So you would never spend any of your time in one place with one student. And so anyway, I have to thank Mike for that. I would not have thought of that myself actually, but it works. It's like put your hands in your pockets and then talk them through it, which is, and the skills exercise is so focused that now it's bringing it down to just a small skill set.
Right.
So it's a lot easier to get that instruction in and make it accurate and make it land with those students.
So what I want to do on one, I think we have a camera set up for it, Joe. Yeah, we do. So I'm kind of got a camera pointing the other side of our shop here. Joe's going to talk to you about this particular one. So right now you see squares and circles. We have a set of plans for this exercise too, but it's built on what we call a mini box build. So it's a 2x6 frame. What are you, 24 inch, 32 inches?
I think it's a 32-inch box.
Right. So ignore the plumbing that we use in here. This is just an example of how many of our skills exercises build on the parts and pieces from the one prior. But the first exercise is building this mini box. So explain the mini box, if you will.
This is basically a very short, compact framed wall. It's a 2x6 lumber. And we always talk to the students through it. You have a top plate, you have a bottom plate, you have studs, right? You even have some blocking in here. They do this from a set of plans. That's, you probably have it there, Mike. So a specific set of plans, and this is about assembly. And you get to choose the tool of choice for the assembly, but it's about flushing out edges. It's about squaring up parts. It's actually about cutting those parts to length from a set of instructions. It gets assembled. This one's put together with screws, and it could just as easily have been done with hammer and nails, pneumatic tools, any of those things. But it's about quality of assembly, not speed or modifying it, building it just like the plans call for. Nothing fancy, but a real challenge for students. Something as simple as centering a block in this box, or squaring up a 2x6
With toenailing.
to another one, or toenailing.
Right.
How do I get the last end of this block fastened when I've got another block in the way? These are things when we're framing in the field. We do it all the time, but it's getting isolated in a really small space, and each student can kind of experience those problems that you have to solve. This will definitely translate to a larger wall, right? It's all the same parts, they just get longer or taller. That same box gets sheathed, right? 7/16 OSB. And we even make them struggle with a seam down the middle. And now you have a surface that you can do a layout of some simple geometric shapes, and they can use a tool that they're being trained with, the jigsaw, to now once they've laid out these shapes, they get to cut them out, basically one in each quadrant. And it's nothing fancy, just a couple of circles and some squares. But the layout dimensions are specific, which, if you're cutting holes in a subfloor or a deck somewhere, it's not that much different that you'd have to find the center of a shape and then trace that shape out on the deck and then cut it out with a tool like say a jigsaw, or heaven forbid, a Sawzall, which that would be an option for this exercise as well.
I've got up on the screen now, the framing side.
Right, so there's your mini box, that's the build. And then it gets sheathed. So each one of these, A, B, C, and D, they have to cut them out, and there's a challenge for each one of these quadrants. This one would be making this shape centered as inside of the framing that's behind here. So now they have to consider the offset of a 2x4 within this framing, center that shape in that space, or it could be that they have to cut to the edges of the framing and do it as cleanly as possible. So you're setting up challenges for the students that that they will face, that they're not clear about what they're in for until maybe they make that mistake, they nick it, or they learn by, basically by just experiencing it.
We shift up to the electrical exercise and bring that one up on the screen.
Sure.
Too.
Simple electrical exercise, and this is a 4-foot 2x4. This is having a student make a very simple circuit with an outlet. It basically a single feed outlet, a switch, and then a light that's operated from that switch. It's all wired together in series, and there are details about specific wiring connections. Basically you're taking devices, setting boxes, running cable, using staples, securing that cable to lumber, which is basically what you're doing for every circuit you run in a house. Right. So it's just been simplified and squeezed down to a 4-foot 2x4 board, and it is a lot of the challenges are very surprising for students. Just setting a box on a board that's loose can be a challenge.
Sure.
And this all translates to doing it in the field as well, same kind of thing.
During COVID, we had a few programs that obviously weren't in class. So some of our partners had materials already, and this was before they got rules that you couldn't even hand out stuff. Right. But they had students come by the school, pick up Chromebooks for most of their classes, but they also picked up materials for their trades class. And we made a version of this where they sent them home. We did not send it with the receptacle, the plug. We cut that off so nobody plugged it in, and they had to build it, use a set of plans, and we made a whole skills exercise on continuity testing. So it became a whole thing that was able to be done at home. Doesn't work for everybody, but in a lot of cases it worked.
And the beauty of a lot of the electrical components was they were reusable. Right. Some. I mean,
Right.
given the right set of
Right.
students, we're reusable.
So here's a skills exercise, and well, Joe will show you the box again in a moment, but we took this skills exercise with PEX, the same shape that's there, we used in PEX, in copper, and PVC. So one version was doing it in the mini box, and we'll show you that in a second, you already saw it, but the other was just doing it free on a desk. So it really allowed a student to be able to go through, follow instructions, follow bends, follow where parts and pieces are. And then when we wanted to make it more difficult, we used that same exercise, but now you had to do it in the mini box build.
Right.
So you had the constraints of the built environment versus just doing it on the desk.
And I'm going to tell you, this exercise is 10 times more difficult in the box. I mean, and this is the world that plumbers have to work in, small bays in framing. So you can take something as simple as that PEX circuit and just have to put it in this box, and all of a sudden it gets real world.
Right. The one thing I do want to bring up, especially when sometimes we have folks that are looking at plumbing and saying, oh, we're not covering that. Most of the schools we worked with this past year, it was whatever they could teach, whatever you could get done, because you had to do a lot online and maybe save the hands-on to when classes could come back in smaller sizes. But in any event, this wasn't intended for a full plumbing course. It was intended for an intro to plumbing. So it was, what is PEX, what is PVC, what's copper, what are the basic fittings, and how do I use this? It was by no means hitting all the competencies of year one plumbing class, whatever the code is in the Common Course Numbering System. But it does hit, and Jen, I'd have to look at your course structure again, but I know a lot of places are going to, fundamentals of construction and then like a construction technologies, meaning let's do a survey level almost of a lot of different topics. So let's talk about different wiring, and we'll do basic wiring, but we're not doing a year on it. Or let's do a little bit of plumbing, but we're not doing a year on it. We're seeing that shift. So a lot of these resources, if you teachers do not cover plumbing today, it may be something that there's still resources available that you can do that intro level. So I know we're pushing up on our window, Jen, so I want to respect everybody's time. What questions could we possibly answer? You obviously know our position of skills exercise versus builds. I love builds. Do them when you can. Just do them as capstone projects. Do them at the end of a semester. Do them with your second year people, depending on what the structure is. Spend enough time with your students to make sure all of their skills are there. Individually observe them, support them, evaluate them, and be respectful of passing them. And if they're not, support them and have them get there to passing. If your students are rock stars, and we've seen some programs where they just are, you might be able to fit a build project in that year because you've seen every single student do a great job. Well, great, then they're ready for builds.
And a great place to prove that is in a skills exercise, because a really advanced student can nail those things together like that. I mean, they should not struggle with them at all, but they also can be assessed on them like any other student. So they can go very quickly. They don't interrupt the program.
Right. So there was a question on there. I'm going to put a link to our website in chat in a second. But yes, you can access our resources. So I started by saying we created a social enterprise called Teach Construction. So when I say social enterprise, that means we have a mission. We want to help you do the work that you do. But at the same time, we also have to run a business. So by this, we've taken about half of our content, and that's available to you for free. Absolutely no cost. You can log into our website, you can create an account, get the access to that content, and a lot of the skills exercise in our fundamentals, from fastener boards to, grab that board behind you, the header board, the nailing tower, or not nailing board.
This guy?
Yeah, and I'll show you that briefly as I summarize it. This is another skills exercise, which is just a sandwich header. We use it for speed square, that's why there's a grid marked out on it. We use it for fasteners, nails on one side, screws on the other. Those grids offset, so you're not having two fasteners interfere in the same space. The reason there's cuts out of it is we use it for reciprocating saw practice, and there's a set of plans where to cut on this board, how far to cut through, and what to do. Right. So we've done that. One exercise is hammer, cordless drill, speed square, tape measure, reciprocating saw.
Right.
all on the same sandwich header that you're making out of a 1 2x6 and a piece of OSB.
Right.
Well, a strip of it.
Right.
And actually the strips are the same width that we use in our panel cut exercise for circular saw.
Right, for the OSB.
Right. So all of that kind of content, everything we have for fundamentals, you can have access for no cost. We do have premium content, and some of that content is, I'm not turning this into a commercial, I just want to let you know. So when you get in there, you say, hey, where is some of this? Some of the content's available at no cost, some of it isn't. Here's our website. All of that stuff, safety, measure and mark, basic tools and materials, power saws, and painting, because that one was sponsored. All of those resources available for free currently. I say currently because each year I have to reassess it on how much we can make available for free. There is also full courses for plan reading, some applied math, electrical, wood framing, plumbing, and Windows course. So there's a bunch of stuff and more coming. We're doing wall framing right now and have done a lot. There's 11 new lessons that just came online just for wood-based wall framing.
Yeah.
We provide a video, we provide a PowerPoint presentation, well, it's as a G-Slides. We provide a question and answer library for you to make quizzes. We provide skills exercises, student vocabulary. You get all of that content. There is no hooks, no charges, nothing. That's there as part of our way to support the industry. So that's the end of a commercial. What kind of questions can we have in the last minute and a half to 2 minutes? Or I'll stay online longer.
My only question, as you were doing the skill, taking the kids through skill development, how do you keep them from not doing these little mini contests with one another, like I can do this faster than you, and getting out of control?
Often, students will naturally try to do that. So what we do though is, as the instructor was working the room, you can find the two that are competing and you go talk to the one. Not to say don't do it, you just slow them down by engaging them, right? So that's one way to slow it down. But two, invariably, when they're trying to make it a speed competition, they mess up, just like the example of the sawhorse. So we will say, okay, everybody, not to call out a student, but say, remember, this activity is not who's done first, it's who is done correctly.
Right.
I don't care how long it takes you.
Right.
So you have that, but then you got kids will be kids or boys will be boys. I mean, you do. I mean,
well, what an easy way to fix that is that all of the work that the students are doing, and this becomes a problem for space, I understand, but it gets saved. So your student, the product that they're making, the longer it can stay around, the more they realize that it's a product that everybody gets to evaluate, right? I couldn't believe it, but my students we would do cut practice, and those students would keep those blocks at their desk for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I would have new trainers would come in, and they'd try to throw them away after the first day, second day. And I'd get protests from my students and protests from me, because it's about the students building confidence, but also having pride in what they're doing. So speed's okay as long as safety's first and as long as accuracy is not forgotten. So, as trainers, we're always reinforcing that. A trainer will never say, don't worry about it, the drywaller will fix it. You'll never hear that in a training program, right?
You hope not.
Right.
So, but you hear it every day in the field. But
right.
The last thing I have on that, you were talking about the cut practice. I don't know if you remember that set of plans when we showed them, but those cut practice blocks, when you do both sets, you push them together, it fits a perfect box. So what we did see was students comparing their stack of blocks to each other. Because if it was done perfect, it made a perfect box. But when you cut on the wrong side of kerf or you did something off, your stack of blocks was a Leaning Tower of Pisa. So those were the competitions we were glad to see, because it was on accuracy. So, any other questions we could possibly answer? And it looks like somebody already went to our site from Greeley Schools and created an account. I'm assuming a person was on our call here, since it just happened at that time. So great. Do it. You'll get an email from me later today with a link. We also have a link to, we have a demo learning portal up at buildingcte.com which you can, as a teacher, can get full access to and see all of the content. Just as another resource. In fact, it's actually right there. So that's another resource available to see content in a functioning learning management system. The reason we make that available for free for everybody to look at is a lot of times you all now have to make a learning portal. And it's nice to have a model. We're not saying ours is the best, but we've been at this for a little while and it's pretty darn good. So you can go in there and explore courses and just see how we did it, how we made quizzes, how we tied lessons together, how we do what we call engagement videos, where we make a little video saying, hey, welcome to this section of a course. Now we're going to cover X, Y, and Z, and I'll check back with you when you're done with the lesson. Just something so that learning portal is not just a bunch of links. So I hope it doesn't happen, but if we end up in another forced learn from home situation, if you don't have a learning portal yet, you're going to want one. And I hope you're working in that direction and supporting more of a hybrid learning environment. It's great for study aids for students, but just another resource for you to take a look at and get some ideas if you wanted to. Fantastic. Well, Jen, as usual, let us know if you need anything.
Great. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.